Good afternoon, happy Monday, and welcome to today's Case Math Masterclass. My name's Naman, joined by my colleagues Katie and Japheth today. We'll also be joined by a special guest a little bit later in the show. You all are the real ones. You're hanging out with us on a Monday afternoon talking about case math. You're our kind of people. We're excited to dive in specifically today to the 4 steps to case math mastery. If math makes you nervous, if it gives you butterflies in your stomach, then our goal by the end of today is that you have a little bit less anxiety around the quantitative portion of the case interview. So stick with us through the next hour. We're going to walk through our best practices. We're going to walk through an approach that you can start to internalize. We'll also demonstrate at the end what an A performance looks like. So you have a visual of what we're going to talk about here in today's masterclass. Before we dive in, I have one question for you, or more specifically, I actually have 2 questions for you. Just let us know kind of where you're at in this process. Are you, pre-MBA or post-MBA candidate? Are you a working professional with a certain level of experience, or are you joining us from one of our university partners today? That would be helpful. And then just also let us know when you expect to interview. So those of you in the Zoom, you can just pop this in the chat. If you're on YouTube, you can pop this in the chat on YouTube. But for example, if you are an MBA candidate who's expecting to interview in over 9 weeks, you would say 2D in the chat. That would just be a quick code to let us know kind of where you're at in this process, and we'll make sure that we tailor today's conversation to where the critical mass of you are in this process. As you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and kind of filter through and get a sense of where we're at. I'm going to turn things over to Katie. She's got a couple of announcements for us. She's wonderful. She's our black belt advisor, former BCG. So Katie, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks, Naman, and welcome everybody. I'm excited for this session as well. So I think I'm seeing a pretty wide range here in the chat, but it looks like we have a strong number of folks that are maybe about to interview. And what I can tell you today is that Black Belt is your friend if you need to get ready for that upcoming interview. You get 10 sessions that you can use between your first round and second round interview to make sure that you land that offer. I am a product of Black Belt, and it helped me land that full-time offer with BCG. And, if you are still in the application process, we also have a version of that that can allow you to get a resume and cover letter edit and also coaching hours. But the biggest thing you can do right now, whatever step of the process you're in, is to commit to getting that extra help so that you can level up. If you're looking for even more help, Super Prep will get you there. That's if you maybe don't have the strongest network or you're just super new. That's 20 to 24 coaching sessions plus an editing package that's optional. Um, and then lastly, just kind of jumping back to the top page, if you have an interview maybe tomorrow or sometime this week, you can get one session to just tighten up those loose ends just before you go into the interview. So you can purchase any of these through the QR code here. If you're still not sure, you can also go to the QR code and book a call with me, and I'm happy to hear your circumstance and guide you. Back to you, Naman.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Katie. Take advantage of that opportunity. Grab 15 minutes with Katie. If nothing else, you'll get some direction and you'll learn something new about the recruiting process. It's going to be a win for you, regardless of whether you end up working with us. But our goal is to make the right recommendation for you on how we can serve you just the way that we've served 15,000 other candidates who've successfully landed offers. So we look forward to talking to you after today's session. Here's our agenda for today. I'm going to quickly walk you through the 3 types of case math. All math is not created equal, so I'm going to walk you through the 3 types you can expect to see inside of a case interview. Then I'm going to walk you through our 4 steps for conquering that case math. No matter which type of problem you see, the steps are going to be consistent that you follow. I'm then going to walk you through how the firms evaluate the math portion of the case, and then we'll end our time today with a demonstration and Q&A. So if questions arise as we're going through today, then go ahead and pop them in the chat. We'll be keeping track of them. We have some pre-submitted questions that we're going to get to first. If there's then time, we will address the questions that are in the chat. So the earlier you get them in the chat, the higher the likelihood that we'll be able to get to it before our hour is up. One of the other things I just want to mention quickly is we always like to give you guys stuff for free. Okay. I hope you've noticed that if you've been following Management Consultant for any amount of time. 99% of what we do is free, even though we have amazing paid programs. So I'm going to leave this up here for 15 seconds. We have a free milestone-based case prep plan that we want to give you today. So just scan the screen with your phone, and this case prep plan will guide you through the first 28 steps that we believe you should take in order to prepare for case interviews. And they're not long, kind of like weeks long steps. Like these are micro steps that you can take in order to get ready fast. And so, again, I'll leave this up for 5 more seconds. Scan the QR code, grab your free prep plan. I think one of the worst things about case prep is feeling overwhelmed because there's just so much you feel like you have to know. When in reality, there are some things you have to know, but what's more important than knowing everything is doing things in the right sequence in the right order. And so this prep plan will help you to do that. If you missed this or you weren't able to grab the QR code while I was talking, then just let us know in the chat and we'll see if we can pop this back up at the end of the session today. Okay, so let's start here. Let me just very quickly walk you through the anatomy of a case interview. If you are already in black belt, this will look familiar to you. If you're a partner at one of our universities, where we do like 200 workshops a year, this will look familiar to you. So I'm not going to do like a deep dive into this, but I just want you to see that there are five distinct pieces to a case interview. There's an opening, there's a structure, there's a math component, there's a brainstorming component, and there's a closing. And so the opening is really where you will listen to the interviewer give you the case prompt. You will listen for the business problem, the client, who the client is, the industry they play in, the key data that the interviewer is sharing with you. You'll have an opportunity to recap what you've heard. You'll have an opportunity then to ask a couple of clarifying questions. And if you've been in any of our other trainings, you'll know that the goal of asking clarifying questions isn't to sound smart, it's to ask questions that limit scope. And so what you want to do is really clearly understand the business problem that your client is facing and their business model so that you can conquer the next part of the case as quickly and efficiently as possible, which is building your framework. And so that's the structure piece. That's building your work plan, if you will. It's your analytical work plan. It's saying, look, if I was running this engagement from beginning to end, here are the work streams that I would want to pursue to answer the question that we've just clarified together. And so that's the grand pause in the game plan. You get 2 minutes in an interview to build that plan. You get 2 minutes in the interview to present that plan. And if you missed the structure masterclass that we held last month, it's on our podcast, it's on YouTube. Go find it. We did an hour just on the structure portion of the case. Okay. So I'm not going to rehash any of that here. After you build your structure, after you put that work plan together, it's time for you to do some analytics. Okay, and then there are two types of analytics that you'll do inside of a case interview. There's quantitative analytics and qualitative. And so we're talking about the quantitative problem solving part of the case today. This is where you're going to be asked to do math. You'll have, for most firms in most rounds, at least one math component. As you get to final rounds at MBB, you can expect multiple math components in one case. Okay. Final round math isn't necessarily more difficult than first round math. You just have to do more of it. And so it's the consistency, it's the stamina that's the bigger challenge than the actual depth of the math you're being asked to do. Uh, we'll have another masterclass in the future on brainstorming and on creative analysis. And then once you've wrapped up the analytical part of the case, it's your job to elevate a final recommendation for your client, talk through why that's your final recommendation, and end with some risks and some next steps. So we are really just deep diving into one portion of the case interview today. I show you this for two reasons. Number one, so that you know where this fits within the broader context of a case interview. And number two, so you know why firms are asking you to do math in the first place. They're asking you to do math not because you need to be a human calculator, not because you won't have access to Excel on the job. They're asking you to do math because you are going to be asked to defend every input that you make on the job. You're going to be asked to defend every assumption that you make on the job. And understanding kind of how to do analysis is actually more important than the like doing the actual analysis, running the actual numbers. Like the setup of the model, the setup of the analysis, understanding what inputs matter, which inputs don't, understanding what you're solving for and why you're solving for it. That's going to be your job as a consultant. Plugging in the numbers and doing the math is something that a calculator, Excel, AI can do for you. But I have to see that you have a comfort with quantitative problem solving, and that goes way beyond calculations. And so that's why you're asked to do math inside of a case interview context. Now, there are three different kinds of math that you are going to be asked to do inside of a case interview. Let's take these one by one. Let me just not bury the lead here. The ultimate goal of all of these types of math is to see if you can get to data-driven insights. Again, it's not to see how good you are at doing calculations. It's to see if you can arrive at a numerical answer, put that within the context of the business problem we're solving, and extract insights from that answer that our client can apply moving forward. That's the goal. Okay. And so there are three different ways that skill, that ability will be tested. Number one, it's verbal math. Now, think of verbal math like a word problem. Okay. This tests your listening skills and it tests your verbal comprehension skills. So I'm not showing you an exhibit. I'm not showing you a chart. I am just reading a math problem out to you, and you have to listen for what's important. You have to be able to take notes. You have to understand what it is we're trying to solve for. So that's the most common type of math problem that you'll encounter inside of a case interview. We'll demonstrate one here at the end of our session. The second kind of math that you're going to run into is chart math. Now, chart math tests your ability to quickly interpret and calculate data in tables. So when I say chart, I mean a table. And so, uh, there are simple tables that you'll see inside of a case interview. There are more complex ones. But what I'm looking for there is, can you quickly look at that data and start to identify patterns? I don't necessarily need you or want you to like do math across the entirety of the table. Can you quickly key in on what's most important, on what's most relevant, and do calculations there to start to identify some kind of pattern, some kind of trend, or figure out where you need to dig a little bit deeper? So that's chart math, it's tables. And then the third kind of math you're going to be asked to do is graph math. And so graph math is every other type of data visualization. This tests your ability to tie insights and math together. So when you look at the graph, when you look at the exhibit, your your first instinct should be there's some math, there's some calculation I have to do. So can you figure out what the math is that you have to do? Can you then, right, tie that to an insight? So what I mean by that is, do you look at the chart or graph? Do you understand what it is you need to solve for? Then can you figure out the math you need to do to arrive at that output? And then can you extract an insight that's relevant to our client? So in graph math, I'm not necessarily telling you, hey, here's what I want you to do. I'm looking to see if you can identify, based on the data visualization, what's important for us to figure out and how you get there. And so you'll see those kinds of exhibits in round one, interviews for sure. You'll probably see at the MBB level multiple exhibits like that in round two. So these are the three kinds of math that you are going to see inside the case interview. And there are four steps that we recommend that you take, regardless of the kind of math problem you're faced with inside of an interview. And so I'm not big into memorization, but I want you to memorize these four steps. Okay. And then whenever you see a verbal math problem, a table, or a graph, okay, I've got to follow these four steps. And here they are. You always recap first, then you structure, then you solve, then you deliver the insight. We work with, gosh, hundreds, thousands of coaching clients a year. We teach 150 workshops a year on case interviews, and we run into like so many people who tell us, I'm not good at math. Like, this is a struggle for me. And once we start to actually coach them through the process, we figure out, oh, you're actually fine at math. Your struggle is listening. You couldn't figure out what you were solving for because you didn't do a good enough job of listening. And because you didn't know what you were solving for, you got stuck in the math portion. It's impossible to be good at math if you don't know what you're solving for. You don't have a target to hit. And so people often default to thinking it's their calculations that are the issue. Oftentimes it's not. And so taking this four-step approach is not just going to help you in the interview, it's going to help you in your prep because it's going to help you figure out where your gap actually lies. Okay, so let's walk through these four steps in detail. The first thing that you will do always when you're faced with a quantitative problem inside of a case is you will recap. So there would have been some kind of prompt usually associated with the math problem. read back to the interviewer what you just heard them say. If they told you what you're supposed to be solving for, read that back first, then read the data back to them as well. Make sure that you understand the mission, that you understand the objective, that you are correctly identifying what the problem is that you're trying to solve for and what the data is that you've been given. Make sure that you heard 3 million instead of 300 million, right? Because that'll throw your answer off right away. So, make sure that you've got the data right that they want you to have. That's what the recap will do. Should take you 30 seconds. Once you've recapped, walk the interviewer through your algebraic approach before you start doing calculations. So start to actually walk them through what you're going to do without doing it. So first, I'm gonna multiply this number by this number, and that's gonna get me this interim answer. And then I'm gonna be able to take this interim answer and I'm gonna be able to divide it by this number that you gave me, and that's gonna get me our market share. Just as a very simple example. Walk the interviewer through the math you're going to do before you actually do it, so that they can follow your thought process before you start throwing a million numbers at them. That's gonna do two things. First, it's gonna help your interviewer keep track with what you're doing. Second, it's going to help you identify if you're missing any data that you need to actually solve for X. A lot of people, they'll jump right into the calculations once, I give them a math problem. They'll get halfway through the calculations and they'll figure out, oh crap, I'm missing data I needed. And then they start freaking out and then it's all downhill from there. So laying out your algebra first allows you to make sure that you have all the data that you need, because you might have a sneaky interviewer who held something back from you in the prompt on purpose to see if you'd realize you were missing an input that you needed. So structuring your math first will save you a ton of headaches later. It'll also make you incredibly easy to follow in terms of your actual verbal walkthrough. And it'll also convey executive presence, because that's how I'd expect you to communicate when you're walking someone through a model. Before you start just walking them through all the numbers and all the inputs, I'd first expect you to walk them through, like qualitatively, kind of how the model's set up. And so I'm testing you for all of those things inside of what seems like a very simple math component of a case. Now, if you've recapped and you've structured, what you've also done for yourself is you've bought yourself time to do the math. So as you've been walking someone through your math approach, in your head, you've already been getting ahead. You've already been starting to think through what the calculations will tell you when you get there. And so when you get to the solve portion of this approach, you're familiar with the numbers and you know what it is you're supposed to do. So at this point, you can just talk the interviewer through the calculations you've already laid out in step two. So now you'll say, okay, well, this multiplied by, x multiplied by y gives me z. And then z divided by this number here gives me, a. And you can start to walk through the calculations. And be careful here. What I'm not saying is write down every single math problem and every single math step on paper and then write and lift your head up and talk. Like, you are supposed to be talking your interviewer through the calculations as you're doing them. This is a conversation. So you can write down every interim answer you get to just to keep track of where you're at in the math, and then kind of summarize and do what you need to do at the end to give your interviewer what the final numerical answer is. But you cannot be doing every micro step of math on paper. So this is verbal. You are talking the interviewer through the calculations you're doing. Beyond just helping your interviewer follow your thought process, what this is going to help you do is figure out if you're on the right track. So when you're talking as you're calculating, it enables you to sense check your numbers. And if something is off, you'll hear it oftentimes before you see it. And then you're able to go back and say, you know what? I missed a zero there. So let me just go back. Let me figure that out. Okay, this is how it impacts the rest of the equation from here. And so talking has the added benefit of actually helping you stay on track. Now, one of the reasons I mentioned that here is if you're not practicing your math verbally, you're doing yourself a disservice. So one of the things that we do in Black Belt, and one of the things that I would recommend you do on your own if you're practicing, is practice your math out loud. Don't just do calculations silently. It's not what's expected of you in the actual interview. Now, once you get to the final numerical answer, A lot of people at this point take a deep breath and they're like, okay, I'm done. I got the answer right. And they feel like they can sit back a little bit and relax. And I have bad news for you. You're not quite done yet. Okay, so you're almost done. Getting to the numerical answer is meaningful, and you should get the math right most of the time. But what I'm really interested in as the interviewer is your insight. Okay, so once you get the numerical answer, your next step is to transition directly into giving a three-part answer. All right, and level one of a three-part answer is the actual number that you got to. So, what's the number that you got to at the end of your math process, and what do you think about it? Hey, you know what? This is a smaller market than I anticipated. Here's why. You know what? It does look like our variable costs are the largest driver that are contributing to our profitability decline, right? Just like your first instinct when you look at the number, what is it? That's step one. Now, part two is the interim action you would recommend the client take as a result of the analysis you just did. So, based on what we're seeing here about the Romanian market, my first instinct is we should enter the market because it's bigger than I expected. This is the number. It's a $5 billion market. It's bigger than I expected. I know we haven't done all of the analysis yet, but based on what we've seen so far, I'm thinking this market entry is a go. Right? That's the action. That's step two. Step three, part three is what's next. So what would you want to look at next to either validate or redirect the action that you just gave? So, I know that our market size is $5 billion, but what I don't know yet is how much share that we could realistically capture. So what I'd want to look at next is what the competitive landscape looks like in Bucharest. Is it a fragmented or a consolidated market? Do we have data on, market share by competitor? You are done when you give me the numerical answer, when you give me the interim action, and when you tell me what you want to look at next. So if you don't get to all three levels of insight, it's not yet a complete answer. Now, I put all of this on one slide for y'all, just so you can take a look at it, you can screenshot it, and so we can dive a level deeper. So let's just look at this in a more granular view, just to make sure that we're understanding each of the four steps. So I already talked you through the recap. You want to make sure you have all the data that the interviewer is giving you, and you want an opportunity to ask for anything that you missed. Now, on top of all the reasons I gave you for why you should recap, the one I want to call out here is just in like an increasingly AI-enabled world, I want to see that you have the human skill of being able to listen and connect with me as the interviewer. Okay? So the recap enables you to do that on top of everything else that we've already discussed. Now, we already talked through structure. You're walking me through your algebra out loud before you do any of the calculations. And this is what I mentioned at the top of our call. Your ability to plan the math is actually more important than your ability to do the math. That's really what I'm assessing you on here inside of the quant component of the case. Because again, you'll have tools and aids that will actually help you do the calculations in real time. But if you are feeding them kind of bad structure, if you are solving the wrong problem, if you're not setting up the inputs correctly, it doesn't matter what tools or technology you have at your fingertips. Top candidates in the structure part of the math will provide a hypothesis to test. They'll say, you know what? What I expect to find here is that the market is going to be too small for us to enter. Here's how now I would calculate market size to see if this market really does make sense for a client to enter or not. You are connecting the dots between the analysis you're being asked to do and the overall business problem. So what I want to see here is that you know why you're being asked to do the math, and I want to know that you know what you're looking for. right? Again, that ties back to the last point of planning the math. You're not just doing work for no reason, you're doing it to confirm some kind of hypothesis. Now, when you're solving the math inside of an interview context, you will never ever use a calculator or a digital aid, including ChatGPT. If you were on our interview with Keith Bevins, who's the partner and head of recruiting at Bain, you heard him talk about how the firm is screening out candidates who are using AI as an aid inside of the interview process. It's an automatic fail. So if you have a virtual interview and you're kind of tempted to use some kind of calculator or other aid in a virtual interview, just don't. It's just better to practice and do it the right way. So no calculators, no digital aids. You won't be allowed to use them in the interview, so you shouldn't practice with them either. Simulate the interview environment in the way you're going to practice. And then I've already walked you through the importance of talking through your math process so your interviewer can replicate it. And practice adding insights as you go. Right? Layer in some of your perspective as you solve kind of the interim parts of the problem, really to ensure that this looks like a conversation. And we'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. Last thing I'll just mention here is that when you are sharing your three levels of insight, connecting kind of what you are recommending the client should do at this point and what you'd want to look at next back to the overall problem gives you huge bonus points. So here's what I'd recommend the client do as a result of this analysis. Here's what I'd want to look at next to either confirm or disprove that. And the reason why I'm thinking this way is because we identified at the very beginning of the case that this is the biggest problem that our client is facing. All right? It's slowing growth, or it's declining profitability, or it's whatever the kind of macro business problem was. If you can connect the analysis you're doing here back to the overall prompt, kudos to you, bonus points for you. Last thing I'll just mention here is around timing. The entire process from beginning to end, these four steps should take you around 5 minutes. So folks, when they're practicing, they often fall into the trap of over-explaining. I don't need you to do that. I need you to take 2 minutes to structure your approach. Just tell me how you're going to do the math. I want you to take 2 minutes to actually do the math, talk me through it, and I want you to take just 1 minute to walk me through your three levels of insight. Here's what I found, and here's my initial thinking. Here's what what I think the client should do. Here's what I'd like to look at next. And just kind of boom, 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 1 minute kind of gets you out of there clean in around 5 minutes. You're ready to move on to the next part of the case, and you want to save that time so you can complete the rest of the case components before your interview time runs out. Let's look at the scoring. And the reason I'm sharing this with you here is because I want to raise the floor of your performance. Okay, if you will check some of the boxes that you see on this slide, you can automatically get to a 2 or a 3 out of 4 without even being even good at math, right? Like because a lot of the criteria that you see here has to do with structure, has to do with process, has to do with setup, does not have to do really much at all with calculations. And so if you look at kind of a score of 1 out of 4 for case math, one of the things that you see here is that it took you too long to solve. So if you have a process down, which you all do now, these are the 4 steps that I take every time. And if you have a general sense of timing, like you're going to get out of level one or a score of one pretty easily. Like if you can follow a coherent process, if you can stay on time, and if you can get to some kind of answer, like you're already out of the first bucket. Now, level 2 out of 4 really has to do with a lack of insight and a lack of kind of verbal walkthrough. So again, if you will walk me through your calculations and if you will try and end with some kind of insights, you're already at average, and we haven't even really focused on the calculations yet. So what we're trying to do today is give you a playbook that you can internalize and that will help you get to average really, really fast. And from there, you can work with a coach, you can work with a peer, with a partner to get from average to excellent and really layer in specific insights, be kind of as flawless as possible with the calculations to go from average to excellent. The biggest difference between an average and an excellent math candidate, there's really two. First, you lead with a hypothesis. Here's what you expect to find, and you include that as a part of your out loud structure. Second, you end with the three levels of insight. Of course, your math has to be correct as well, but most people, it's not necessarily the calculations they struggle with, it's everything else. And if you have everything else, the calculations fall into place. So after today, just kind of knowing this process, you all should be between a level 2 or a level 3 before even doing any additional practice, if you'll implement what we're talking about. Let me just quickly walk you through 6 tips and tricks for faster math, and then the 6 functions that you need to know for case interviews. And then we're gonna introduce our special guest, and we're gonna do a demonstration together. So number one, I've already mentioned this, but no mechanics on paper. So you're verbally talking me through your math process. If there are multiple pieces to the problem and you have sub answers that feed into the big answer, you can write down the answer to every sub answer. But what I don't want you doing is writing out 2 times 4 equals 8, right? Like we can't like be writing down that level of math on our paper. You just write down 8 and then you get to the next sub answer that you will need. Tip number 2, set your units first before you do math. So you might have some units that are in the thousands, some units that are in the millions. Make sure your units are equal. Kind of drop the zeros, add them back later. Will help you go faster, will help you avoid confusion. Third, baseline numbers can be incredibly effective. In our mental math course, we've got a whole lesson that a lot of you should have access to just around kind of baseline numbers, right? You know that 1/10 is 10%, and 1/9 is 11%, and 1/8 is 12.5%, and 1/5 is 20%. 1/50th is 2%. Kind of knowing some of those baseline numbers will just help you do the math faster and help you feel less lost in this process. So if some of that is foreign to you, it can be worth taking a few minutes just to get familiar with those baselines so that when you run into 1/7, you know it's 14% roundabout, and you can kind of move on with the math that you want to do. Round to the ones place. We run into a lot of candidates who like to round to the tens or even the hundreds place. When you compound that over time, you're going to end up with an answer that's materially different than what's accurate. So our best practice is not rounding at all when you practice, just in case you run into someone persnickety in the interview room who's not going to let you round at all. If you absolutely have to round to the ones place. Block out to speed up. What do I mean by this? I mean, oftentimes you'll have multiple pieces of math that you have to do inside of one problem. I might give you 3 customer segments, across 4 product categories, and I want to know kind of like the share inside of each segment. So just focus on solving, the answer for one segment first, and then repeat for every additional segment, uh, and then just add up kind of your sub answers at the end. Like take each component of the math one at a time, get get the answer for one segment, and then apply that process down to the other kind of subcomponents of the math. It'll help you go faster, it'll help you avoid confusion. And that's what I mean by following parallel processes as well. Kind of do one part of the math, get it right, and then just apply that same process across all the other math that you're being asked to do. So if you'll follow some of these tips and tricks, you'll find it to be a little bit less scary of a proposition. This slide here is just to show you that case math isn't actually that complicated. So for most firms, for most roles, you're going to have to know how to do these 6 things. Add and subtract. I hope we're all there already. Multiply and divide, work with large numbers, and work with percentages. So these are kind of the core mental math functions that you'll have to be incredibly well versed in. But no one's asking you to do like, advanced calculus in a case interview. Okay, so sometimes people try and get too in the weeds. They try and get too advanced. If you can block and tackle in these 6 functions, for most firms, most roles, you're going to be a-okay. Japheth, any questions that you think we should address at this point, or should we move right to our demo?
I think now's a great time to run into the demo.
All right, let's do it. Well, we have one of our coaches who's very generously offered to demonstrate how to do this well. So welcome, Cabrera. Do you just want to give a 30-second introduction of who you are?
Yeah, hi everybody. My name is Cabrera. As Iman mentioned, I'm one of the coaches here at MC. Currently, I work for the government, but prior to that, I was a career consultant working at PwC, Bridgespan, and then most recently McKinsey. So really excited to be here with you all and hopefully to demystify math because I know that this was one of the more scarier aspects of the case when I was especially interviewing.
Amazing. Correa, thanks so much. Just to refresh everybody's memory, here's the four-step process that we're going to go through. And so what I'm going to do, Correa, if it's all right with you, is I'm going to read out this verbal math question
Okay.
and I'm going to ask you to take notes. And then once you've taken notes, we'll show the question to everybody on the call as well.
Okay. Got it.
If you want to work alongside Correa, then grab a pen and paper and do so and use this as an opportunity to practice. All right, Cabrera, here's your prompt. Our client is a diversified hardware manufacturer that produces a multi-purpose hand tool with a core base and multiple attachments. For several decades, the client was the only company to make such a tool. Over the past 2 years, the company has seen a decline in revenue. Here's some important data for you to know. The company prices this tool at $50 a unit. They currently sell 100 million units a year. They sell through one channel, which is a hardware retailer, and they cannot break that contract. And the price elasticity of demand is zero point 0.5. This means that a 20% reduction in price raises demand by 10% and vice versa. Should the client change prices to reverse their revenue decline? If so, how?
Okay. Sounds good. Would you like me to recap before you actually share it to folks on the call? Okay.
Let's do it.
Okay, great. So just so we are both aligned, so our client is a hardware manufacturer who produces this purpose tool with one core base, multiple attachments. It's really helpful to get that visual in my mind. So it looks like, historically they've been the only company that has sold this, but they're experiencing most recently declining revenue. And so just so we get a baseline of what the current pricing looks like, they sell each unit for $50, and they sell 100 million units through one channel, which it looks like that's our only option currently, given our contractual obligations. The question here, though, is there room or should we potentially consider changing our pricing, given that we know that price elasticity is zero point 0.5? So a 20% decrease in price should realize a 10% increase in demand. Am I correct? Am I understanding the problem?
You are.
Okay, awesome. Happy to continue, but just want to make sure I'm on for the purposes if we need to show the prompt for folks so that they can see. Okay, great. Um, okay, this is a really interesting problem. So the way that I would see this is that I think we actually have to do some scenario testing to one, understand what is the potential revenue that we would get, or what is the current revenue that we're getting baseline, right, with the $50 price. And then see if we were to go, let's say, 20% lower, what would be the expected revenue? And then simultaneously do the same analysis if we were to go 20% higher in price. And ultimately, in comparing all three, hopefully it'll enlighten us in understanding should we actually change the price moving forward.
What
So,
do
in
you,
turn, oh,
Cabrera, what do you think is going to be the answer?
so it's interesting. Looking at this, my suspicion is that um, if we were to actually increase the price, I think we might actually see an increase just given the proportion of what the elasticity is telling us. That being said, I'd love to double check to make sure that my hunch is correct. And then also beyond that, I'd want to think about really does that make sense for us to actually increase prices, just giving my personal, experience as a consumer? Would that actually make sense as more of a short-term strategy, or is it something that we would want to continue in perpetuity? Um, so in terms of how I would approach it, so let me at least for right now figure out what current revenue is. So that's like the number that we ultimately have to beat, right? So it looks like we sell $50 per unit times 100 million units. So multiplying that should give us revenue. That would be 50 times 100, 5,000 million. Converting that into actual numbers, that would be uh, $5 billion. So that's how much we're getting as revenue. Let's try the lower end just to knock that out. I'm suspicious of that, but I'm curious. Let's see what that ends up being. So looking at this, you're gonna bring it down by 20% of the price. So 10 or 20% of 50 would be a $40 price point, but demand simultaneously would increase by 10%. So 110% of that, 110 million units would be sold. Multiplying that out together, it looks like it would be 44,000 million, which would be $4.4 billion. Okay, so my hunch was right. It looks like we should actually decrease the price. So let's actually see what the higher price would look like. So increasing the price by 20% should mean that we would add $10 to the $50 price. So that's $60. But we need to acknowledge that demand will go down because it's a higher price. Makes sense intuitively. So 10% decrease, that would be from 100 million units, that would be 90 million units sold. Multiplying that all together, that should get us $5.4 billion. So it actually does seem like we should increase the price. At least as a short term, if we were truly seeing like this decline in revenue and want to think about immediate next steps. That being said, I think that probably need to explore other alternatives. Just based off what you mentioned, it seems like you mentioned in past tense that our client was the only company to sell such a tool, which likely seems to suggest that there might be other players. And so in some ways that does leave us vulnerable because we don't necessarily have the power to dictate the price if a competitor could undercut us and potentially remove that gain and or, I guess impact the demand that we would get. So I would recommend, I think currently based on what I know, short term this makes sense, but longer term I'd want to look at other strategies for us to bolster revenue, whether that be even looking at other avenues that we can sell, acknowledging that there's a contractual obligation that we have here, or even thinking about if there's other ways that we can potentially increase spend with our other tools that we're producing.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Cabray. I thought that was fantastic. I'm going to pop up what I had on my slide here just so people can see what she did. All right. So, um, first thing that she did is she just recapped the data and confirmed she had it right. So we were all on the same page around what we were solving for and the data that she had. She next walked us all through the math she was going to do before she did it. That was helpful because it actually helped me follow the numbers that you were saying when you started to do the calculations. I already knew where you were going, right? So that was helpful for me because I can't see your paper. And so a lot of you are going to be in virtual interviews where the interviewer is not going to be able to see your paper. And so it was easy for me to follow the thought process without having some kind of visual aid because the structuring had happened first. The calculations were fairly straightforward. You can see she kind of wrote down the 5,000 million. She wrote down like some of those kind of like key numbers, but she didn't do like all of the math on paper. At least I don't think so because you did it too fast, right? So like
Yeah.
it was mental math, right? Like with some writing as she went. She layered in some of her perspective as she went, and then her insight was short term, raise the price. Longer term, I'd look at these potential alternatives based on this shifting competitive landscape. So really appreciate the demonstration, Cabrea. I thought that was very instructive and very insightful.
Happy to help.
So Japheth, I know at this point that concludes kind of the formal like teaching and demonstration part of the session, but we had some pre-submitted questions. And so I'm just going to pop these up. Let's go through these quickly. And then after that, if we have time, we'll address some of the questions that came through in the chat. All right. So, Cabrera, since you just did this, you mind if I throw a couple of these to you as well?
Sure.
So one of the first questions we got is how do you best structure or write down the math so it's not all over the place? So like, how did you just do it for this math problem? How'd you actually take notes on your paper?
Yeah, so the way that I did it, I've tried to do this on Zoom and it's a bit confusing, but generally what I think about, maybe if I can get a sheet of paper instead of my iPad, is that I think I put my paper into, you're gonna watch me do this live, where I structure my paper. Oh, I'm blurred. But anyway, I make a line so that vertically on the paper so that I have 2/3 space for solving, 1/3 for actually doing notes on the left-hand side. And so that's where I was writing out all the notes that you gave me, really focusing on numbers and using chicken scratch where I could to make sure that I could capture everything because they do go pretty quickly when you're listening to like the prompt. I then split my paper in half. And so from the top, um, I try to think about what would be the approach. And as I'm talking with you, sometimes I will actually take notes of like, okay, this is how I'm thinking about structuring the problem. And then the bottom end is where I actually will do the notes. I tend to use a lot of circling to make sure that I know what are the key numbers I need to put in for inputs. And then when I get to the final one, I really circle it. So I think it depends on what makes most sense for you. That is the best strategy that I found for myself. But I think the main thing is it's similar to kind of at the top of the stem or what, at the top of a case when you get the stem is like, how are you able to get all the information in a neat place? Um, I think organization is key, I guess, for lack of, and to prevent me from rambling, I would just say being organized is the most important way of doing this.
Whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever makes sense for you.
I know for me, like I think in terms of bullets. And so there's three or four bullets that like I can pre-write. Like for example, like number one is what's the business problem?
Yep.
Number two, key data with some sub bullets. And then like almost like a miscellaneous, right? Like that nugget that you picked up around the fact that we are not the only player in the market anymore, that'd be like kind of miscellaneous insight that you'd be able to use later. And so if you even like think through ahead of time, okay, these are like the three or four bullets that I'm always gonna like pre-write on my paper as soon as I know we're heading into the math portion of the interview, kind of will help you stay structured because you've done the thinking ahead of time. Let me ask you this then, Cabre, since you're here. What are the most common math formulas used to solve a case? So we've got Kager, we've got payback period. What's a must know, and then what's a nice to know?
Yeah. So I think in general, right, like understanding the basic mechanics of business problems are like understanding those formulas I think are really important. So right, so understanding how profitability works, right? The basics I think are the most critical. In terms of things like a Kager, those are nice to have. I haven't seen them in all of the cases that like I have given, but even as an applicant, or even payback periods. I think the one thing that I really appreciate about the MC website is that the way that we have the math structured is that it really focuses on like these are the things that are going to get you to like 90% you're going to be exposed to. And then we're going to tell you these are the things that might come once in a blue moon, like the rule of 72 of thinking about like when it will take for your investment to double, right? Those tend to be less common, more so in second rounds. So I would say keep it simple, be able to understand the fundamentals first. Those will be largely what you're going to be able to see. And then once you've developed the aptitude and ability to be able to do those great, then start focusing on like the ones that you might see occasionally, but I wouldn't necessarily fully index on.
We have a course in our curriculum called Business Basics for Consulting, where we walk through like core business formulas. And so, if you're coming from a background where you're like, hey, I don't know how to calculate market size or market share, or, some of those types of very simple or basic formulas, go to the Business Basics course. And if it's in that course, you need to know it. If it's not in that course, it's a nice to know. That's the way that I think about it. And so it's the whole reason we put it together. It's like your business formulas 101 type of crash course that you could finish in a weekend if you just want some comfort and confidence that you know what you need to know walking into the math portion of an interview. I like this question a lot. I'm interested in your take because I certainly have one. If a calculation is taking too long, is it appropriate to just say you're going to estimate or assume the answer?
I would say no, because that's not really, I can't assess you on math by saying that you estimated or assumed the answer. What I would say is generally if it's taking too long or you're panicking or there's a mistake, one is if you think it's taking too long, it may not, right? I think people's own sense of time is slightly warped. And two, if you panic or make a mistake, okay, acknowledge it and move on. In some ways, as consultants, how many times have we all made mistakes with a math problem, right? Like I can name the number of times that me or my colleagues have made like an Excel error that was like a big error, but you move on, you look at it, you're like, okay, how do we redirect and go back? And so I think in a lot of ways, I would focus on being cool, calm, and collected and think of this almost as like a stress test, right? Okay, it's not always going to be great. That's fine. How do you regain control of the situation? Take a step back, think about it, and be like, okay, where am I potentially looking at this incorrectly? How can I refocus? And then try to continue and finishing the math. Because again, if you're going to say you're going to estimate or assume, again, I can't really give you points on that. So it's better to try and complete it than to just give up and call it, take the L.
I found that very rarely will a mistake kill you, but your response to the mistake can kill you.
Yeah.
And so knowing that should actually help reduce some of the nerves because if you can even like fake being okay with it, just like, oh, it looks like I'm missing a number here. I'm missing a zero here. Let me go back and try and figure it out. Just that response to the mistake might actually display more executive presence than doing everything right the first time. And so keep that in mind as well. You always have a chance to rescue yourself if you end up needing to be rescued. I think that leads into this next question. How do I not get so nervous solving math in an interview? Any tips or tricks you have that you share with your clients, Cabrera, around this?
Yeah, so I think part of it is just doing it enough times where you kind of build a thick skin when it comes to getting math. But I also think another way is just kind of shifting your perspective when it comes to how to be able to answer a problem. So I think historically or naturally we're intuitively taught to solve a problem the way that they teach us in school. So if you're doing, I don't know, if you're doing 32 million, 75 cents times 32 million, you might actually do traditional like multiplication to try to figure it out. But it might be easier actually to convert 75 cents into a fraction. And that might visually just be easier for you to calculate. So in some ways, it's kind of looking at a problem and understanding there's multiple ways to solve it, finding the way that's most intuitive for your brain in order to calculate it faster and getting there. And so that's the thing that I try to work with my clients on. For example, I know when I was an applicant, zeros really made it really difficult for me conceptually to do large multiplication or large division, like large number division. And I realized actually using scientific notation was helpful for me to kind of, um, you know, figure out where to kind of remove the zeros so I wouldn't get confused, but have a structured way of being able to make sure that my numbers were in the correct order of magnitude. So lots of tips and tricks that folks like us will teach. And again, what I will say is like I was not a math major. Math was like always been my weakest aspect. But coincidentally in my interviews, my feedback was that I did really well in quant. So it can be done. You just got to practice and get yourself ready and exposed to it to the point where you're ready to answer the problem.
I love that. I know for me, if you ask me 75% of 32 million, okay, okay, great. 50% is 16, 25% is
Yep,
8, add them together,
exactly.
right? So like lots of little tips and
Exactly.
tricks you can practice and not have to have the entire spectrum of the numerical universe memorized.
Yep, totally.
So
I always say
um
10% is a very magical percentage if you can know that. Like especially what you were saying, the numbers. If you can memorize that, it can really help you chunk math
yeah,
into really easy calculations and add them all together.
absolutely. So I'll take this one. The most common mistake you see people make on the math portion, it's what we've talked about all session. It's no recap, no structure, no insights. It's thinking that math is all about the calculations instead of about the entire process. That's the most common mistake we see. It's why we're holding this class today. How to do division and percentages without a calculator? Cabrera, I know you're coaching people all day, on math, on the entirety of the case. How do you do this? And then I can share a perspective as well.
Yeah, again, I think it's kind of what we discussed previously, which is like figuring out how to chunk it into ways where you're not actually doing long division, is a way that you get at it. And candidly, I think, a lot of the math that you're asked to do isn't really hard. It's just it's more complicated because there's more zeros, or it's like a bigger order of magnitude that you're used to. I think once you figure out techniques of how to figure that out, being able to do the division itself is pretty simple. Like, we're not going to ask something that gives you a crazy number that you wouldn't be able to naturally calculate via mental math, right? While these casing might sound cruel, like they're not really cruel in terms of trying to get you to calculate something that's impossible. So I think again, to your point, figuring out how to chunk it and make it easier or like simpler in your head, I think is a way to get around doing division and percentages without a calculator. And some of it is going to require you to memorize a foundation so you can apply it.
And the best way to break down large numbers, I think we already talked about this with a scientific notation. I think that's a really helpful tip and trick.
Mhm.
Japheth, I know we've got a handful of minutes left. Are there questions in the chat that we can address before we wrap up our time together?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most common questions was with the three levels of insights, what's the difference between step 2 and 3? What's the difference between the action and the what's next? That seemed to be tripping folks up.
Yeah, absolutely. So the action is what you would recommend the client do as a result of the analysis right now. And then what's next is like the next piece of analysis that you would want to pursue to either confirm that that action is the right one or to explore further. So I won't over explain it. I'll just stop there and folks can let me know if that's clearer or if that warrants further explanation.
Great. Thank you so much. I think folks are kind of wondering what's the threshold for how accurate I need to be in order to get the offer. One question around that is, can I still get the offer if I get some math wrong in the final round interview?
I don't know if I've ever met someone who didn't make at least one math mistake. And when I say that, I mean I don't know if I've ever met someone who got an offer who didn't make at least one math mistake in their interview process. So, um, in our experience, math mistakes are not fatal. Again, your response to them can be, um, but perfection is certainly not the standard here.
Love it. All right. Question, is it okay to be mostly talking while looking down? Just trying to understand virtual casing expectations.
So Cabrera, I thought you did a really nice job of demonstrating this. You kind of look down, you wrote, you look back up at certain points. Do you want to speak to that? Because I thought you had a nice balance of like looking down, so you actually had organized notes, but
Yeah.
like you still made eye contact.
Yeah, so I do think it's important to look up, namely because, right, a case interview is supposed to simulate a client interaction. And so the question I would ask you is, would you find it as a client be acceptable if someone was talking to you just looking at their paper the whole time? And the answer is probably going to be no. You wouldn't feel happy about that interaction. What I would say is you don't have to completely look at the interview during the entire duration of the interview. I think it is normal to, take notes. You got to look down at your paper and see what you're writing, but you do need to check in and show that your ability to develop client connection, even if it's in a Zoom interview. And in a lot of ways, I think it's more important to look up, particularly in Zoom, because it's not you can't have the same interaction that you would have by being physically in a partner's room doing your interview. So I would say keep it together. Like you have to do both. But if you're constantly looking at your paper, I would then ask, is it because you feel nervous about saying your math? Like there'd be some other issues that I'd want to kind of investigate in order to make sure that, you're showing you have enough time to do the actual problem, but at the same time, you're actually able to build client rapport in this situation.
I love it. Last thing I'll just mention here is that our goal today is to give you a process that you can follow. And so the way that you internalize it is practice, practice, practice. So go through and do some cases in our library, do follow some cases on our YouTube channel, and work alongside us as we do them. And actually pause the video and recap. Structure out the algebra as if you were going to solve it. Do the calculations out loud. Practice driving to deeper insights. A lot of people they default to a level one insight, which is, hey, this is what the number is saying, and that's it, right? But put your advisor hat on and then say, okay, here's what I think the client should do as a result of what we just found. And now here's what I'd want to look at next to build on the analysis that I just did. And if you'll go through that kind of iterative process, you'll find that you'll start to build the muscle memory to do what Cabrera did and what she just made look really, really easy. So I'll leave that as kind of a parting, encouragement to you all to take this and apply it immediately. We will send out some follow-up resources to everybody who registered for this call. So be on the lookout for those in your email inbox by the end of the week. If you're interested in coaching with Cabrera or with another one of our fantastic coaches, go ahead and scan the QR code and book a call with us, and we'll let you know just based on your interview timeline and your case experience, which package is right for you. There's kind of 1 hour a la carte options. There's package options as well. So no matter what your budget is, there's something there that fits what you're looking for and what you can afford. With that, we'll wrap up our time together today. Best of luck this case interview season. We'll see you soon for another class. Thanks so much.